Good evening, and welcome to Conversations with Dr. Health is Wealth. What night is it tonight? Monday night, and Monday night is we talk about health is wealth. Welcome, welcome. I want to remind you to share with a friend, get to and as always, we're going to go on Steve panel and introduce us here. I am having some tech difficulties. I can see it. It keeps telling me that I have an unstable team out today trying to work on it, so we don't know where that is. But if I blink out, I'll be back, and everybody else will handle everything that's going on. So I'm going to start with the man who has the best art in the world, but he is so modest about it. That's our very own Joe Harrington. Joe?
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Congressman, for providing this platform. And it's great to be here again 1 week with my esteemed colleagues. My name is Joe Harrington. I'm retired public health, healthcare professional. Spent 20, 30 years between public health and healthcare. Retired in 2017 as a regional health officer for Cook County and an administrative law judge. And I'm on the phone with Dr. Terry Mason, who's requesting that you let him in, Nikki. Is she free?
Okay, I don't see Dr. Mason. I don't see him, but once I see him, of course, we will definitely let Dr. Mason in. I can't see him.
I'll work with him on that. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much to my colleague who leaves us and go and have fun in the sun. However, we're having some great fall weather here, and that's our very own Dr. Douglas Graham. Dr. Graham?
Hey, thank you, Nikki. I was here for the day. I was outside. I enjoyed the fall, but you got it right. I'm getting ready for some fun in the sun. I'm a physician. I worked 30 years in the western suburbs, and after I retired, I spent 2 years in the congressman's office, and it was a really wonderful experience. I'm going to try and answer as best as I can, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be here with everybody. So where did Nikki go?
All right. While we're waiting on Nikki, we'll go to Dr. Pete, my fellow hat buddy. So tell us what your hat is about. Welcome, Dr. Pete.
Well,
please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues, and thank you, Congressman and Nikki, for creating this forum for us to communicate with the community. I have to admit, I put on this hat because my hair, I need a haircut. So I'm just waiting until my appointment. Back in the day, we didn't have appointments for barbers. You can just walk in and just sit down for all day. But now they got apps and stuff now.
Yes.
So we have to make appointments now. So that's it, Dr. Meyer.
Got to get that schedule. I remember that. And you know what? And that was one of the heart of our community, spending that time is, a point of fellowship for a lot of people. Mr. Harrington, I believe you introduced yourself. Have you? All right. And then, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Maya. They call me Dr. Maya 100 because I love to keep it 100. Today is also a head day for me. I'm going through the same thing as you. I remember I used to have long locks. I didn't even know it was this cold outside because I had so much hair. I couldn't cut hair. And now it's a whole different story. But I asked you about yours, but I am wearing my hat. Try to get that in there because yesterday I ran the hot chocolate 5K with my mom for the first time. Dr. Peter, I know we see you running all the time, avid runner. And I'm getting my mom involved. I told her a family that 5Ks together stays together. And we want to get into some questions. But before we get into some questions, we definitely want to give Congressman Danny K. Davis an opportunity to say hello and thank him for the forum that him and Nikki has created. Good evening, Congressman Davis.
Well, good evening, and I don't know how we're going to meander our way through the need for mental health. And I was thinking that all of us are going to need as much mental health as we can get, given the fact that our world is almost at war. And when superpowers are testing ballistic missiles, and I mean, the warlike atmosphere is embracing the whole world, and people are marching from countries where they live because they don't think they're safe there, and they don't think they can get enough to eat. They can't have the quality of life that they had hoped for. And so the world is in turmoil. I mean, absolute turmoil, any way you look at it. And unless we are able to do something diplomatically, we're going to find ourselves in a world war.
Yeah.
And it will become the kind of world war that we've never experienced in the world before. And it's so unfortunate. So we just got to try and hold on and hope that decision makers will make the most rational and logical decisions. You know, trying to get people to agree to a ceasefire. And we can see thousands and thousands of civilians being killed, children, adults. One side saying we want to kill the other side, and the other side saying, well, if you're going to kill us, we're going to kill you, and we're going to keep people. And to imagine being in a country where war is going on, or an area and one side is saying you civilians can leave so that you're not in danger. And the other side that is fighting on behalf, they say, of the civilians, but they won't let them leave. Can you imagine what it's like being in a situation where the group who supposedly is working in your behalf is holding you and saying you can't get out of the way? You got to stay here with us because we're here to protect and fight for you, but we ain't gonna let you go. And you're not militarily trained. You don't have the weapons. And the only thing you can do is try to hide and get out of the way of armaments that were not necessarily intended for you, but you're part of the action. So, yeah, our mental health is is going to be tested and seriously tested as we try and hope that we can at least reach a point. People are begging for a pause, saying, well, if we can't have a ceasefire, let's just have a pause. You know, the way they used to do back when they fought the 100 Years' Wars and that kind of thing. They would sometimes pause and let somebody go to church, or they would pause because the duke's son or the baron's son was getting married or whatever. And now we're saying, can you pause so that medical supplies and equipment can get into people who are in great need of it? and are going to die and suffer without it. And we can't get a pause to do that. It's tough. It's tough. I don't know what we're going to do, but I know it's a sad state of affairs. We got to do the best we can. So maybe the health people will know what we can do.
Outstanding. We want to say hey to Dorothy Murphy, who's here with us. She says, good evening to everyone. Nellie Purnell King says, good evening to everyone. Sister Bonnie is here and she says, good evening just as well. Connie Taylor is here and she says, good evening to everyone. Karita is here with us on today and she says, hello and good evening to everyone. Dr. Mason is here. I know he's having some tech difficulties, but can you hear us, Dr. Mason? Well, while he's working on those, as soon as he can get his tech difficulties together, I know that he probably can hear us. Maybe we just can't hear him. You know, in the month of November, we raise awareness about diabetes and COPD, which is known for chronic obstruction pulmonary disease, and antibiotic safety. But also, just about 6 days ago, our president, Joe Biden, actually made a declaration and a proclamation to hereby proclaim November of 2023 as the National Lung Cancer Awareness Month. So just wanted to make sure that we are raising awareness about all of those things that are so important that are happening in our communities. And I know you had some questions, and we're going to have a brief conversation about those questions that came in with regards to vaccines, such as flu, pneumonia, COVID, and shingles. What you can and cannot take together. Can you take everything together? What you should do. And then we'll go right into Joe's conversation. So Pete, Maya, if you guys can grab those, the importance of being immunized really quickly, then we can move forward. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I can just I'll start out my so I think it should be just acknowledged that there has not been a single public health intervention that has had the impact that vaccines have had. Now, so that being said, it does not mean that if you get a vaccine that you're guaranteed not to get the infection. So I think we should just acknowledge the fact that vaccines have been and will be the single most important public health intervention that we've ever had in the world, basically, not just in this country. Now, practically speaking, these vaccines, I always like when I'm seeing my patients, I try to look at what's important for right now. So you're right, there's a ton of vaccines to get done, but we're presently in the flu season and in the pneumonia season. And so I would prioritize those two, and then probably third, COVID. COVID is still alive and kicking. It's not as deadly as it once was, but it's very infectious, this particular variant. So I would just prioritize. Don't forget, the flu kills 80,000 people a year. That's 80,000 people a year. The flu does. Now, those people tend to be people with a lot of comorbidities like kidney disease, heart failure, diabetes, COPD, cancer. So those are the people that tend to be the ones that are at risk for high morbidity and mortality, being sick and being hospitalized and potentially dying. So those are the people that we would probably prioritize in getting those vaccines. Now, in terms of which to get together, I can tell you, from somebody that just had, I got the flu and the COVID, and I can tell you that most times I have not had any symptoms at all. What you might experience in terms of side effects, you can experience, well, there's always local side effects, right? The the pain of the injection itself, and the soreness, muscle soreness on your arm. But you can get some chills, muscle aches, fever. You can get feeling tired, things like that as a result, like a couple of days after. But all that really means is just that your immune system has gotten revved up, right? So you gave the vaccine, and now the immune system did the appropriate thing. It's getting revved up so that if it comes in contact with that infection, it's going to do an adequate job of fighting off the infection. I don't know, Maya, you want to?
No, thank you, Dr. Pete. In addition to, I think Dr. Pete was talking about revving the system up, and there was a question about how that happens, right? Some of us eat. Let's do. I just made a a stew. Well, no, let's do leaves. Like, say you have a plant based and some greens, right? Or you have tea, right? A mint, right? You're having the leaf of it, right? You're having a leaf, not a whole tree. If you eat, I tell people that eat chicken, you go and you get a chicken wing. You're not eating a whole lot of chicken. That is what the vaccine is a piece of a particle that makes the body recognize that overall presence of that virus, of that bacteria, of that germ, and the body revs up. It's almost like giving you a piece. The body doesn't like it. The body does a couple of things: raise your temperature. That's why you have a fever, and send all these chemicals to try to fight off that particle, not the whole chicken particle, just the chicken wing. But what that does is, should my body encounter that whole tree or that whole chicken, my body already knows what to do. It sends them same soldiers that it developed the first time to deal with it. So that's why when you get if you get a vaccine, we say the flu vaccine may not keep you from getting the flu. What it does is prepare your body to process it quicker and give you less severe outcomes should you get it. That's not the first time the body's like, oh, we've been around this block before and we ready. And so that's what happens. To talk about a little bit about, I know we have a lot to talk about. I just want to touch base, Nikki, a little bit about who gets what, right? So the COVID-19 vaccination is recommended for everybody 6 months and older, right? And then you talk to your doctor, depending on what kind of vaccine you got, things like that, Moderna, Yanyos, Pfizer, that kind of thing. You talk to your doctor, they'll tell you what's the next step for you. The pneumonia vaccine. So to be clear, we already got a pneumonia vaccine. If you went through the healthcare process, if you received healthcare as a child in the United States, you already got some pneumonia vaccine. You are getting a booster if you are 65 years or older, or Dr. Pete mentioned some things like diabetes, other things, conditions where you talk to your doctor, you want to make your body ready earlier, because he mentioned that some people have more severe outcomes should they get it. So maybe you're not 65, but I'll have a severe outcome. You talk to your doctor, you may get the pneumonia vaccine. Get your vaccines tailored to your needs by your healthcare provider. And then the Yanyos vaccine is still recommended for anyone 17 and up. And then remember the RSV vaccine. So pneumonia booster is 65 and up. RSV vaccine is 60 and up. And so, and you're not getting a whole lot of chicken. You're getting a chicken wing. You're not eating a whole tree. You're getting a leaf from that. And so that's what I have to say about the vaccines. Oh, Mr. Harrington, your point that you make all the time. The more people that get the vaccine, the more protected our communities are. So going back to what Congressman Davis said, y'all, back to protecting the tribe. I always bring it up, okay? I know people are like, why she always talk about it? Don't act like it exists. Why you don't? Let's talk about that. But how do we protect the tribe? The more people that are around us that get the vaccine, the more protected our communities are. All right. So make it. Don't wait till it's already there. You running trying to get an appointment. Make your appointment now and get it. You can usually get these vaccines at a pharmacy or at your healthcare provider. Now, I want to throw in, there's just one variable, public health wise. I just want to throw in, and then I'm going to leave it alone, Nikki. I'm going to leave it alone. Okay. We are at a point where we're having an influx of other people that are joining our communities that may not have had these vaccines. So we're at a point where me getting the vaccine will protect my body earlier and protect my community. So it's just really something to think about. You can't be like, oh, everybody got that, because now we have an influx of people that may not have gotten it, which would put our communities at more vulnerable risk if we don't step up and do what needs to be done, getting that vaccine, pharmacy, or your healthcare provider. Thank you. All right, Emma.
Outstanding, and thank you so much. Pastor Crystal Kyles is here, and she says hello to everyone. Valdemir Talley is here. He says good evening to everyone, and he says, "Are there nasal vaccines for younger?" I think he means patients, not parents. So I think he means patients. So he's asking, "Are there nasal vaccines for younger patients?" And also, our great tribe over at the Core Center says, "Thank you for doing this," and they say, "Please don't forget to touch on HPV." So thanks. So Pete, Maya, Doug, Dr. Mason, who wants to grab it really quickly?
HPV is another virus, and it's not uncommon that we have viruses. Most of the diseases that we get as childhood are viruses, and what happens, this particular vaccine that we're getting for human papillomavirus, or I got to make sure I got it all right. This particular problem is because this particular virus can create some really downstream bad problems. It's associated with cancer of the cervix. And we have a lot of women who have cancer of the cervix. It doesn't mean that they're all infected with HPV, but HPV, human papillomavirus, is one of those viruses that does this. And there are a number of people, actually, I remember when I was going down to Springfield, that wanted to make sure that we made it possible for all young people to be vaccinated from HPV. And it doesn't matter what kind of sex you're having. You have to know that if you have contact with any of those, what we call them, that part of the skin, the virus can go in and set up house and do what it needs to do. That's what viruses do. You also got to remember, if you're having, and I know this may be a little adult for folks, but if you're having oral contact, you can also get HPV. And it can cause other kinds of problems in the throat and things of that nature. So we need to be careful about all the things that are happening, and realize that the vaccines will only work if you take it. And you take it with the prescribed interval and what have you. But you also, it shouldn't mean that you didn't take license not to protect yourself sexually and what have you, and to have a better knowing of who your partners are. And knowing that the more partners they have, that's like you having sex with all the partners that they had too. So you need to understand that and just because somebody says something, you want to bet your life on it. So just think about it, and I'll leave it at this point. We did a lot to try and get HPV, human papillomavirus, actually put into a status where it was almost mandatory to give. There was a lot of pushback about it, because a number of people feel very strongly about those things. But I think that it's definitely, and I'll let my other colleagues comment. If I left any holes, please feel free to fill them.
Just to add, HPV now is the most common cause of head and neck cancer. I mean, above alcohol and tobacco. So just to be clear, it's really a major risk factor. And if we can get more people vaccinated to prevent head and neck cancer, just picture that, wrap your brain around that for a minute. Head and neck cancer, the most common risk factors used to be alcohol and tobacco. Now it's a virus. that, to Dr. Mason's point, you may have come in contact with having sex. Oral sex is part of life, period. Don't even think about it. So it's for me, it's a public health concern, and we need to encourage our patients to do everything we can to prevent them from potentially getting sick, especially from cancer.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just going to close out that conversation by saying, I know I remember when I was younger, I used to see that commercial. They'd be like, one lesson, and it was the girls jumping rope and stuff like that. A lot of people still think that the vaccine is just for people who identify as women. But like Dr. Mason already said, the vaccine is for everybody ages 9 to, and they it used to be 26. I know it used to be 26. Now insurances cover it up to age 45. Right? It comes in 3 doses. The literature is showing we need at least 2. 3 doses are optimal. We need at least 2 doses. Then I would just want to, Mr. Harrington, I know you have something that you were really, really excited to talk about. I just want to grab that last question that Nikki mentioned. The nasal flu vaccine is available. I believe it's everybody 6 months to 49 years of age, but the amount of times you have to go and get it differ depending on your age or situation, things like that. The bottom line is, if it's your first one, you usually get it once, and then you come back more than a month later, you get a second dose, and then everybody else gets, I believe, 1 dose if it's not your first time. All right. And I think that's all I have to say.
I just wanted to add one thing too, if I could, and that is that many of these times, these things start out looking like a wart. That's kind of what they look like. And they don't itch, they don't bleed, and they don't hurt. And so if you see something growing that shouldn't be there, you need to have somebody look at it, just to be sure, be on the safe side, because these things, they don't cause you any difficulty, don't even itch. And so, but they can do other things. And so the reason I want to go over this is because so many of our young girls and our young boys, and depending on where you're having sex, these things can be all of those places, whether they're the vagina, the mouth, the rectum, anywhere it can be. And when you start getting rectal cancers or you're getting throat cancers, I'm telling you from this is a horrible situation. And obviously if you're smoking on top of that, that even makes it worse. So this is a bad actor, and you really want to protect yourself, because once you have a lesion big enough for it to be seen easily by any of the medical professions, you're now limited perhaps what your options might be in terms of how you're going to deal with this. So just think about it.
We're talking about HPV.
HPV. I'm talking about HPV.
Outstanding. Well, Virginia Knight says, evening to everyone. Right before we bring Joe, there's a question for Dr. Pete. The person says, Dr. Pete, you said head and throat cancer. Are there any symptoms for head and or throat cancer? Head and throat cancer.
Yeah. So to Dr. Mason's point, by the time you start getting symptoms, really the horse is out of the barn. But, typically people will have pain in their throat. People, and I'm just talking about like oropharyngeal cancer. So just particularly in their throat, they might start to have difficulty swallowing. They might have nausea, vomiting. Just think about, this is the feeding tube. Just think about anything that it could potentially cause obstruction to food and fluids going down your throat. But again, by the time you've caused the obstruction, by the time the cancer has gotten to the point where it's preventing, a solid or even a liquid, by the time it goes to liquid, it's really big. So you really want to try to do prevention as much as possible. But I would say the main thing is like any sort of obstruction to your throat, pain. You might have bleeding You might be coughing up blood, things like that. But again, if you haven't coughed, if you're coughing up blood, that means the cancer has gotten really large, and and maybe food particles may have caused the bleeding. It's a serious problem. Yeah, and so of course, there's also other head and neck cancers that is an issue as well, that people who have HPV are at risk for.
Thanks so much. Well, Joe,
I'm learning. I unmuted, and I assume everybody can hear me. Yeah, I'm gonna pick up on this topic of cancer, and then jump to what I want to talk about, the adverse child experience study. One is because I think it's important to demystify this thing called cancer. Cancer is essentially an uncontrolled growth of cells somewhere in the body. If it happens in the brain, it's brain cancer. If it occurs in the prostate, it's prostate cancer. If it occurs in the lungs, it's lung cancer. If it happens in the breast, it's breast cancer. But it's still an uncontrolled growth of cells. It occurs somewhere in the body. And this is something I learned from Dr. Mason. In its earliest, most treatable stage, there are no symptoms. That's the problem. You won't know. By the time you have a symptom, something that tells you that something is going on in an area of my body that's not normal, and I need to see somebody about it, you have cancer, and it could, in fact, be an advanced stage. So we really want you to be aware of that and do the types of screenings that are recommended to identify cancer early. For men, it'd be like basic PSA tests, what they call um, digital rectal exam or something like that. Get your mammographies, but there are screening tests to identify cancer and hopefully catch it at early stage. So I want to demystify it, because cancer is the same disease. It just occurs in different places, but it will not produce a symptom. By the time it produces a symptom, you already have cancer, and then you're looking at other options moving forward. So I don't want to understate that. And maybe Dr. Mason has something to add, because he worked in this field for a long time, particularly with men, around the issue of prostate cancer. And that's one of the things that got us together and got us working together in the early 90s.
Joe, you're absolutely right. And I cannot underscore enough. The symptoms are the worst way to think about whether you have a disease. It is the absolute worst way to think about it, because most of these diseases, to the point that Joe just made, especially the cancers or what have you, don't create a symptom. All the things we talk about, the burning, the bleeding, the masses, and all that sort of stuff, that happens late. It's just like heart disease. And I won't get into that at this point. I will at another time. But the things that are creating the heart problem, the so-called heart problem, which is not just in the heart, it's in every blood vessel in your body. It's just that it's blocked up enough to cause problems with your chest or problems with your legs and circulation. So we really need to stop talking about symptoms, because it's the wrong way to think about disease. I don't care what the disease is. And if you wait for a symptom, that's why we test, not guess. So come in and have somebody look at it to see. That's the job of the people like us. And even as physicians, we still can only diagnose things not probably at the actually earliest point, because we can't see it either. So what we want to do is, using the blood test, these things are markers that tell us there may be something going on. That's why we do PSAs. That's why we do all these other things. And that's why sometimes women have to go and have pap smears so they can see if there's any abnormal cells. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, Joe, but it's just it's so important that symptoms are the absolute wrong way to think about disease. We need to stop putting that out because it gives people a false sense of security if they don't have symptoms. And that's not right. That's not right. And one of these other times, I'll spend more time talking about some of our common diseases and this whole notion of symptoms. So thank you,
Yeah.
Joe.
Not a problem. I'm going to go back and pick up because you reminded me of something a good friend of ours, Dr. Paul Crawford, who's no longer in practice. He described this as operating out of a symptom-based paradigm. He talked about Black people. Symptom-based paradigm. That as long as I don't have any symptoms, I must be all right because I don't have any symptoms. And then he went on to say that that's the I feel good syndrome. I feel good, so I must be good and I must be healthy. But that is far from the case. But I'm going to get to the topic that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to toss it back to Dr. Mason because I think he can discuss this because I'm going to talk about an event he held when he and I were working at the health department. But it's about the adverse child experiences study. And I think a number of my colleagues are very familiar with that, but I think it's an important study to have a discussion about some of the things we're talking about, and particularly things related to maybe some of these behaviors in terms of substance abuse and violence, and how the adverse child experience study says that people might be more inclined to make bad decisions moving forward. And it could really mean that you engage in behaviors that could cause you to have not only have some of the diseases that we're talking about, but also have you to die prematurely. But essentially, as I understand, the adverse child experience study was done by Dr. Vincent Folletti out of Kaiser Permanente. It was one of the largest study, and it really started out as a nutritional study, and they were collecting all this data, and they wanted to know what some of the people's earliest experiences were, and they looked at issues related to trauma. And this is for young people between the ages of birth and about 17 years old. And they had several categories of what trauma could be. It's something like experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. Those are just some of what they call the ACEs, adverse child experiences. And they say those types of experiences can sort of hardwire the brain. And what it does is it leads you to make poor decisions, make bad judgments, which also can lead to substance abuse problems, mental health problems, and maybe a tendency or a proclivity to commit acts of violence. But when Dr. Mason and I were at the health department, I think this was probably around 2008, he actually convened a large meeting around the adverse child experience study and brought Dr. Vincent Folletti to Chicago to talk about the study and work he did. Also at that event was Dr. Satcher, former Surgeon General, who was very familiar with it. He discussed it as well. And a noted psychiatrist is no longer with us that really pushed the city to do this, Dr. Carl Bell, who we may talk about later, because Carl did a lot of phenomenal work in this city. So I'm going to toss it back to Terry to talk about the meeting and why he felt it was important to do that.
Well, thank you, Joe. And it was a wonderful meeting. And we did it, I think, at the Union League Club, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And we asked Vince Folletti to come and give this discussion. And Carl, as you rightly pointed out, Dr. Bell was there when this was all being discussed. And there was another study done by another gentleman at a later time that had significantly more Black participants in it than the Dr. Folletti study had. And he was from the East Coast that did this, and he had the other one, and then maybe one day we'll talk about that one. But Vince Folletti's study really started out looking at obesity and looking at these obese women in the Kaiser Permanente, or obese people in the Kaiser Permanente medical plan. And what he found out was that there was a lot of trauma happening that was driving a lot of the eating disorders that they uncovered. And it was driving the obesity part of the obesity situation. And so once they did that, what they had to do is to start a program to help these people deal with these traumas, and found that this was, and I'm really shortening this a lot, was very important in understanding what these people, the traumas that people had. And they had all kinds of traumas that were never, ever, sometimes not addressed, and certainly not managed well. And a lot of times the eating and all these things, there are a lot of things that drive the things that we do. And until we take the time to be patient enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time, we'll never be able to move forward. So, Joe, you're bringing this forward because if you think about it, there was a lot of traumas in our neighborhoods and in our homes that contribute to the behaviors that we had. And the one that they were looking at was obesity. And they've found that even these childhood traumas also manifested themselves in the overeating and a number of things. So,
Smoking.
I'm sorry, I'll stop at
Smoking, substance abuse.
Yeah, all these things. And not to say everybody that did that had an adverse childhood experience, but of the data that they presented, that was pretty clear that those were the things that were positively causative to what people experienced. Joe, I tried to give you the Cliff Notes version.
Right. Yeah. The only other thing that I add, and this again was Dr. Carl Bell, that we talk a lot, and some of what we've been talking about are what we call risk factors, things that make it more likely that you'll develop some kind of condition or disease. We always talk about risk factors, but Dr. Carl Bell talked about something else, and that's really what I wanted to get to: protective factors. He said risk factors are not predictive factors because of protective factors. Those, and essentially what we're talking about is creating a nurturing environment for people, making sure that people have access to the things that they need, making sure that we don't have these kinds of environments moving forward could change that dynamic dramatically. And I think that's what we're hoping long term we can do, is create healthy communities, because if you create a healthy community, you'll see less of these things moving forward. And so what I would maintain, and based upon what we're saying, is there is this challenge in many of our communities that have been neglected for all these years, where you see most of the people that are there that have experienced some form of trauma, either directly or indirectly. And one of the things that I've become numb to, and I think a lot of people have, is every Monday I'm waiting for the shooting and the murder count to tell me what happened over the weekend, because I expect a violent weekend in Chicago. There was a time we didn't expect this, but that has become more the norm. And so a lot of what we're seeing could have been predicted, but it can be changed. But one way to change that is to really try to make our communities whole again. That's what this discussion was about. And I'll leave it to some of my other colleagues maybe to chime in, maybe Dr. Peter, Dr. Maya, or Dr. Graham. Maybe they can chime in and add something to the conversation.
Sure. I'll just talk about experience with ACE. A lot of, I love that uh, presented awareness of what's going on, but then you also presented what Dr. Bell has already said. There is a solution. So when we talk about these things, we're not talking about it from a place of not having hope. We're talking about it as, hey, get involved with your community, get involved with your own healthcare proactively, not reactively. As I forgot who said it, it may have been Dr. Mason or Mr. Harrington, that idea of if it doesn't bother me, I don't bother it is not the way to go. Um, and there are solutions, but you have to engage. You know, we're not yet in a system where the solutions are readily there automatically for us or built into kind of the structure. So you can, but you do have the opportunity to engage in them by engaging in care with a health provider, that and talks in the community, because you know, I'm not saying, you know, our community heals in a lot of different ways, but it has to be a topic. You know, we are very successful at doing anything we put our minds to. And so it has to be a priority in the topic. So generational embodiment or historical trauma is one of the items that Mr. Harrington kind of has talked about we can experience that qualifies. Race and social conditions, you know, in a local context, you know, so generation, what, you know, that is carried, you know, there are books by Dr. Joy DeGruy. I can never say the last name. I apologize. I know I butchered it. That talks about generational embodiment and trauma, but what you experience every day, your local context, right? And then on top of that, complex traumas on top of traumas. You went to school, somebody took your coat, you went home with no coat, you know, like, and you never figured out who at school took your coat. Something called allostatic load. Having the places to cope. Allostasis is when you're able to, something happens, you know, we deal with it. You know, almost like a car. You put in gas, it burns it out. You put in gas, it burns it out. Your heart, blood goes in the heart, it goes out. In the heart, goes out. When you get a backup of your heart, gas in your gas tank, anything, that's called a cardiac load if it's your heart, but allostatic load if it's a loading of those traumas with no outlet. You know, we talk about exercise, we talk about fellowship, we talk about worship, those ways that people heal. If there's no output, then things are building up, you know, and then they lead to malfunction of the next thing, which is coping and adoption of health risk behaviors. The ways we cope, the ways we look for escape. Some people, you know, may look for worship. Some people may look for exercise, like I said. Some people turn to alcohol, substances, or high risk sexual behaviors, gambling, those type of things to try to cope. And so balancing that out at an early age helps you long term. So because what happens if we don't have coping mechanisms? The next thing on the chart, the burden of disease and distress, you know, on top of the structural stuff of criminalization and stigmatization. Criminalization is, remember the difference between cocaine and crack, the sentencing, you know, that's a form of criminalization. You know, saying that everybody living with HIV, if they have a partner and the partner wasn't clear on their diagnosis, that's a form of criminalization. Stigmatization is when society or we make assumptions of things we don't even have all the facts to make it about, you know. And most of the time stigmas, all the time, usually stigmas are not true. Dr. Mason mentioned the doll experiment. The dark-skinned person was ugly. The dark-skinned person wasn't smart. Things like that. That's stigmatization of a skin color, right? All these things at the pinnacle lead to early death. So that's the chart of experiences. I know you all see this. All along that chart are what? Social determinants of health, right? And so the biggest impact that Dr. Bell was talking about is what are we doing in our community to make inroads, right? Right now, we're at a place where, you know, at some time in this country, we were at a place where we were experiencing those things and there were no outlets, there were no people to help, there were no people to, you know, but now we're at a place where there are people in a lot of places, but you have to access it early. Just like those vaccines and diseases. Don't wait till the disease is at your door. Get the prevention methods that that Mr. Harrington talked about early. All of this is about preventive health and going back to what I talk about, protecting our tribe. So
I'm going to jump in because I want to expand on this topic of allostatic load, which is really fascinating. And it reminded me of a quote from Anton Chekhov. It really is very simple. Any idiot can face a crisis. but it's the day-to-day stuff that wears you out. That's what allostatic load, what's happening to you on a day-to-day basis. And your allostatic load goes up based upon the kind of stress or stresses that you're in. And research has shown that African Americans carry a heavier allostatic load than white people because it's just what happens in your day-to-day, the transgressions you have to face, the difficulties you have to face, and other minorities experience some of the same things. And so there are things we could do, but I'm going to stop, and I'd like for Dr. Graham and Dr. Peak to maybe chime in on this as well.
Yeah, I'll just say, first of all, I appreciate you bringing this up, and I just remember being rounding with my team at one of the hospitals, and the resident would present a case to me, and it would be a patient that has a laundry list of health issues and very, very sick. And then we would go in. So when the resident is presenting the case, you're outside of the room. And so then you would go in the room with the rest of the team. And I noticed this patient was missing his eye. And I said, so we discussed the case, and then so I asked the patient, I said, well, tell me what happened to your eye. And he told me this story about why he was missing his eye. And it totally tied into why he was so sick. This man had lived a very traumatic life from the time he was a little bitty boy. And I thought to myself, there's a correlation here. It's not unrelated. And so it was an opportunity for me to teach the team that him missing the eye is a part of the story. It's a vital part of the story because it started the cascade of events that led to this person being in front of us, being very sick, and having all the list of health issues that he had. And so, to my colleague's point, we've got to stop the bleeding. We have to stop it when it happens, and our children, to protect our children, to not to have them to have so much allostatic load. We can't, this whole idea of being resilient. Like I've heard some Black women say, we need to stop saying that we're resilient, because then people don't help us when we say that, And so, but we need to start helping each other. I mean, when we see people struggling, just to supply some support for people, because it's either that or this person a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now will be in somebody's hospital bed and have a laundry list of health problems. And people will say, what happened? How did you get like this? You're only 40 years old. Why are you so sick? And it's because of that allostatic, because of the years of not being protected, not having necessary resources, being overwhelmed by to Joe's point, the daily stuff, always a dime short and a nickel late, never having a stable place to live. Like those social determinants, that stuff matters. It matters because then you have these high cortisol levels, right? That's that stress hormone, these high cortisol levels, because you don't get a break. There's no break for you. And so those cortisol levels are survival hormones that allow us to survive, but it was never meant to be there forever. It was just meant just enough to get you out of the acute danger that you were in. And then the cortisol level is supposed to go down. But if the acute danger never leaves, if you're always under duress, then those levels stay high for an extended time period. Then of course, that's pressure on your heart. There's pressure on those blood vessels. That's kidney disease. That's the inflammation of cells. And the show goes on and on and on and on. So kudos to my colleagues. And I'm hyper aware of this when I see patients, and I'm always aware of picking up where is this person's load coming from, trying to find out where you've been, how'd you get here. And it may not happen in one visit. Keep in mind, it may happen over many visits, but I try to document that in a way that helps me to take care of people. And sometimes I do a lot of referrals to behavioral health because our people, we're so used to dealing with trauma that we say, well, I don't need to see anybody. I said, you do need to see somebody. Well, what you experienced wasn't normal. It's not normal.
But Dr. Pete, we have a quick question for you. Oh, we have a quick question for you. The question is, can having high cortisone levels cause you to overshop or overeat? Could that be some of the reasons why we have those issues?
I don't know if cortisol necessarily explains that, but there's probably a dopamine feedback mechanism that is driving that. So that's a neurotransmitter. It's the pleasure hormone. And so if you are if you're constantly experiencing disappointment, having not the appropriate resources, that you crave dopamine, right? And so dopamine is that acute, I bought something new, right? But then right after you buy it, you need another rush. So you're going to go buy something else, or you're going to go hit the boat and go ring the slot machine, because you want that dopamine rush, because your neurotransmitters, your pleasure hormone is so depleted. It's so depleted because of all your experiences. And so then as a result of that, you engage in these activities, short-lived activities that shoot your dopamine up, but then it come back down. Now that's also explains about drug use, alcohol use, to just get me out of the mind space, even if it's for a couple of hours or a couple of minutes, get me out of this sort of depressive, depleted neurotransmitters that I don't have any pleasure. So you might go out and shop, and you might go out and gamble, and you might go out and drink or use drugs because you want that dopamine surge, but not cortisol this time.
I want to just add something to what Joe had been saying, because there was another person who did a study on adverse childhood experiences in Philadelphia, and he did them as an African-American psychologist, and looked at, because you got to remember, the vast majority of the people that were in Vince Folletti's studies were white. They were from California, and that's who they were. And the vast majority of the people in the other study, and his name escapes me, but Joe, I will have it for the next show. But it was predominantly Black. And when you look at those, when you look at the adverse, when you start totaling up the adverse childhood experiences among the Black patients, it was much, much higher than the counterparts. So that's a whole another kind of thing, to your point, Pete, because that means I'm looking for more opportunities to try and feel better about what's going on. And we have to understand we can never underestimate, because a lot stuff that we still do is still rooted in self-hatred. And we've not talked about that, but we should. And we need to talk about self-hatred. And we see it in its actions in our families, about even some of our darker colored siblings in the same family. The way that we sometimes they're even treated, and the fact that you would hate yourself so much that you would pour all kinds of lie and stuff in your head to straighten it, creating a lot of potential problems, or not wanting to, or not seeing yourself as beautiful, so then you don't see your children as beautiful, and you'll sit around and call them all kinds of names that I won't even talk about. I can't. If I said it, the congressman would expel me. But
Yeah.
But I'm just telling you the language that we use sometimes in talking to our children. And lastly, we see it playing out in ways that we never were able to see before because of the availability of putting stuff out on the internet right away and having people comment on it and use all. And I've seen some of the things and some of the language that's being used and the way that we're describing one another. It lets me know that we're dealing with another level of self-hatred that we have not talked about yet, fueled by social media. And I'll stop right there.
Wow. Well, Virginia, I'm sorry, Stephen Michael says good evening, and Sister Bonnie says this information is so good. We also have a gentleman who wanted to ask Dr. Pete a question, but he kind of changed it. And he said, I was going to ask the question, could this also cause you to use drugs? But you answered it. I wonder this all the time because in our family, my son is a drug user. And we've been to rehab several times, but he was never brought up in a home like this. And we could never understand. I wonder why he hates himself so much. Maybe this is a bigger conversation we need to have. Congressman Davis, thank you. I learned something every time I stop by the show. I try not to miss a Monday. This is so informative. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Well, I know you guys hate to hear me say the next thing I'm going to say, and that says, it's our time. No, this conversation was so good, but it's our time. I thank you guys for stopping by. As always, we're going to have our Until Next Mondays, and we're going to start that with Dr. Mason. Since you had some tech difficulties signing in, we're going to start with you. What's your Until Next Monday?
Remember that you are wonderfully made in the image of our own Creator. And no matter what anybody else tells you, you've got to hear that in your spirit. And you've got to know that you were no mistake. You were not an accident. That you have a gift that only you have and only you can share with the rest of humanity. No matter how dark or how difficult it may be, just hold on. As the song say, don't let go. Because even though your heart tells you so, you know, and I'm going to stop right there, Reverend Davis. I'm going to say Reverend Davis. I'll just go Davis. I'm going to let you go ahead and take that text.
Yeah.
All right. Dorothy Murphy says, I have someone to come on to speak about self-hatred. Thank you so much for the resource, and we would be glad to share our platform with them just as well. Thank you so much. And to all of you who have been texting and inboxing me about my internet service, yeah, I know this is it. This is my last Monday. I can't take it anymore. But you guys come on. I gave them a chance, like people ask. But you guys can actually send me some suggestions. Who do you think I should pick? Joe, you're Until Next Monday.
My Until Next Monday, and I've got two. And one of the things that occurred to me, and everybody's heard this, it takes a village to raise a child. That same village has to heal the village. We have to come together, be that village, and help one another and lift each other up. And I think that's part of what we're saying, that we have the power within us to make the change in our neighborhoods and our communities. We need to coalesce and come together to do it. And I'm also going to leave you with the prescription that when I went to the health department to work with Dr. Mason, he had for the city of Chicago was 5 things that he suggested people do, called 5 to Thrive. It's very simple, and you may not remember it, but we can always share it again with you. Drink more water, eat more fruits and vegetables, exercise your mind, body, and spirit, be sexually responsible, avoid all addictive substances and behaviors. 5 things. That's what we want you to do.
All right. Thank you so much. Douglas Graham, you're Until Next Monday. Doug, you're muted.
Thank you, Nikki. I've been thinking about this, and it's really everywhere. everywhere that you have kind of stresses that you're talking about, it's going to affect the kids, and they will not be able to develop emotionally, socially, and intellectually. They'll do just differently than if they had a secure home. And so, for me, that's my mission statement, is to help improve the security that we have in our world.
Outstanding, and thank you. Dr. Pete, you're until next Monday.
Yeah, Nikki, I was thinking, I think we need to spend more time around positive people. I think we need to shut these phones off. I think we need to talk to each other. I think we need to spend more quality time with our children to hear what they're experiencing. Um, you know, um, I've been I've been reflecting on a lot of things my mom used to say to me. Um, and I think there's those wisdom pearls that she used to say to me that I didn't understand then, but I get it now. And I think our children need to hear those, and maybe and break it down for them, because my mother was from the South, so she would say stuff that you had to translate, because it's like she talking about horses and goats and stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute now. But we need to talk to our kids, because they're experiencing a lot of this, to Dr. Mason's point, through these phones and these social media, these messages that they're getting. And it's like, you're not good enough. You don't look like this. You don't, your life is not like that. And so they're experiencing a lot of these aces, not because of, now, yes, there's some physical abuse happening too, and there's a lack of resources happening, but they also got these phones in their hand that's causing a lot of trauma as well. And so I think we need to shut the phones off, talk to our kids, be around positive people, laugh more. I'm into that laughter thing. I think it's hilarious. Get around some people that are funny. If you got to cut on a video, YouTube, Bernie Mac, whoever, laugh. That is the best medicine. That's all.
Outstanding, Pete. Thank you so much, Arnaz J. Laugh. Dr. Maya Green, you're until next Monday.
Until next Monday, I want to point out two things really quickly, because I've talked a lot this time, and hey, I'm not, I'm glad to do it, and um, I want to thank the congressman and Nikki for creating this space that's intentional for humans and the people we serve. I don't see that going on in this world in a lot of spaces, but creating this space. And I want to thank my colleagues. Every time I'm here, somebody say every time they hear they learn something. Every time I'm here, I learn something. I want to see that study that Dr. Mason is talking about. So thank you, colleagues. The opportunity to care for our community is sacred. I'm honored to be part of this discussion. I'm honored, to have the opportunity to uplift our community. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Oh, outstanding, Maya. Thank you so much. Well, Congressman, take us home.
Well, I guess if I had a takeaway or two, one would be from a medical vantage point of, no matter how you might be feeling, make sure you get your regular checkups. And that even though you feel fine, you're doing all right, uh, keep those appointments, and that early detection and screening are very important aspects. And of course, if you don't visit the physician, you don't get screened, you may not know what you need to do. And so the information can be very effective from an individual point of view. And then, of course, we are moving towards Veterans Day. And I think of all of the sacrifices that veterans made in the military, fighting wars, hoping that they would change the world. And then I look at some of the things that are present and are happening. And I hope that our health department in the city of Chicago will promote the kind of health things across the board that the whole city can somehow or another pick up, reinforce, and the thinking becomes broadly based enough to make the kind of differences that all of you have projected and promoted. And that communities, of course, can be just as unhealthy as individuals. And I hope that our public health, that our public officials who do health will espouse the same kind of practice that I've heard in the conversation this evening, because it makes a tremendous amount of difference. I mean, I grew up with the idea that as a person thinketh, so are they. And I guess I saw enough things. I tell jokes sometimes about my father amputating a calf's leg with no training. No, we just couldn't imagine how he did it, or even how he had the courage to try it. And people who've heard me tell it, I just tell them, don't take my word for it. Ask my sisters and brothers, because they saw it too. And of course, the calf lived. I mean, the calf jumped through a fence during the month of August. It was very hot, and cut her leg on the barbed wire. And we actually saw parasites in the leg. We saw them. And my father said, we can't afford to lose this calf. So we're gonna have to take that leg off. And we said, how you gonna take it off? He said, I'm gonna cut it off. He got some ashes and soot and chloroform, got his axe, built a fire, and got it red hot, just as hot as it could be. My brother and I held the calf. He waved some of that chloroform across his nose, and he actually cut the calf's leg off, wrapped it up in these rags and soot and put coal oil on it, tied it up together, And would you believe the calf lived and walked? And we had the only three-legged calf and became an adult. We took it to the auction where they had an auction. He sold the calf for $175. But then he was a cow and we had money. And he actually did it. And I'm amazed to this day that it happened. So if you think it and believe it and have enough knowledge to try it, you can make it happen. And that's all I know. That's what I saw. Things are challenging. It's hard to believe some of the public thinking that I'm hearing. You know, when I read the paper and saw that 5 states, what we call battleground states, had former President Trump leading Joe Biden in the race for president of the United States, it's hard for me to believe that. But I saw it. And some posters collected the information from somebody. So we have to do all of those things that we talked about in terms of what we believe. And I think that we'll do it, but it's amazing that that's what the thinking of America is like right now. And it's real, and it's just as important as taking your aspirin every night or whatever you take. So thanks for a very informative evening. It's now 9:20 here in DC. So I know I'm ready to go to bed, and I trust that all of you in Chicago are ready to call it a day. So have a good night and a better tomorrow. See you all. Okay. I'll take